Imagine this. It's the dead of night, December 11th, 1978, and the wind outside New York's JFK Airport cuts sharper than a knife. The tarmac lights blink through a haze of cold fog, and the whole place hums with the distant roar of sleeping jets. Most of the city is curled up under blankets, but not everyone's sleeping tonight. In a few hours, one of the boldest robberies in American history will unfold. An operation so clean it stunned investigators, so ruthless it turned the mob on itself, and so mysterious that millions of dollars have never been found. Before I take you inside this mind-blowing story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because stories like this don't just entertain. They reveal how greed, loyalty, and fear collide when men think they're smarter than the world. When you're done, I want to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done if you had the key to a vault filled with millions? Walk away or take the shot? It began, like many criminal things do, with a whisper and a debt. In the maze of terminals and cargo hangars at JFK, there was a man drowning in gambling losses. Louis Werner, a Lufthansa cargo supervisor who'd fallen into a hole he couldn't climb out of. He had access to schedules, security codes, and insider knowledge about cargo shipments. Werner knew that Lufthansa routinely shipped U.S. currency from West Germany to New York, cash intended for American servicemen and travelers. Those shipments were packaged, stacked, and stored in the airline's cargo terminal before being moved to banks. The money wasn't under the kind of armored, alarm protection you'd imagine. Much of it sat behind modest doors watched by tired night shift staff. Werner's problem was survival. His solution was a tip. That tip moved from Werner to a bookie named Martin Krugman, and from Krugman to a man whose name people both feared and respected, James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke. If you've ever seen Goodfellas, the film painted a version of him, but the truth is both sharper and darker. Burke was half Irish and could never be a made member of the Italian mafia, but he was treated like one. Brilliant at logistics, patient to the point of cruelty, and utterly terrifying in his methods. He didn't just steal money. He arranged the conditions under which other men would willingly endanger themselves for it. When Henry Hill walked into his life with a rumor about Lufthansa's shipments, Jimmy didn't react with shout. He reacted with cold calculation. He waited. He verified. He watched. Burke's verification turned into obsession. He had his people check cargo schedules, watch guard rotations, and map the routes inside the terminal. When the numbers added up, more than $5 million in cash and close to $1 million in jewelry arriving soon, he began a plan like a general preparing for war. He picked his men carefully. Tommy DeSimone, violent, unpredictable, the kind of muscle who scared even seasoned killers. Angelo Sepe, a steady driver who knew how to move fast when it mattered. Louis Caffra, Joe Manry, Paolo Licastri, men with histories and scars that made them reliable in the only way that mattered. They had nothing left to lose. And Henry Hill, the hustler, the connector, the one who kept the gears oiled and the gossip moving between crews. Jimmy drilled the plan into them like scripture. No names, no unnecessary violence, no mistakes. In and out before the clock struck 4. If one of you screws this up, he warned, you won't live to regret it. They met in a small diner near the airport, ate quietly, checked their gloves, and waited for the call from Werner. Around 2:35 a.m., Werner confirmed what they wanted to hear. Guards' rotations left gaps, a shipment had arrived, and the cargo doors could be opened without triggering alarms. They climbed into a dark blue Ford Econoline van, the sort of utilitarian work vehicle that drew no attention. Angelo behind the wheel, headlights off, breath visible in the cold air. Inside the terminal, a handful of employees worked the graveyard shift. Paperwork shuffled, coffee cooled in styrofoam cups, and someone made a cassette tape of low-volume music to outlast the hours. These were ordinary people, not used to being part of a headline. At exactly 3 a.m., the van rolled up to the side entrance. 2 men jumped out, moved like shadows, and confronted the lone guard at the booth, Rolf Redman. Before he could react, a gun was pressed against his ribs, and duct tape smothered the air from his mouth. Within seconds, the other robbers had swept through the building with mechanical precision. They bound hands, gagged mouths, and herded 6 employees into a break room. Their voices were calm, almost professional. Their eyes were not. "Nobody gets hurt if you cooperate," one said, but the threat rolled in his tone. They knew the layout perfectly. Werner's inside information gave them the timing, the blind spots, the codes. They dragged the building's supervisor, Kerry Whalen, up the stairs to the secured vault area. He tried to stall. Who wouldn't? He insisted he didn't have the key. That changed when a gun pressed to his temple and a voice hissed. "You've got 10 seconds to open it." Whalen cracked. He keyed in the code, spun the wheel, and the vault door groaned open like a mouth exhaling a long-held secret. The sight froze every man there. Metal boxes, crates, and packages filled the room. Bundles of cash wrapped in rubber bands, stacked in rows, and velvet bags glittering with jewelry and precious stones. Even hardened criminals felt the gravity of it. You don't see that much untraceable cash and feel anything but something like reverence and alarm. They worked methodically, loading duffel bags, boxes, and containers. One man kept watch on the hostages while the others moved with a kind of practiced urgency, like men who had rehearsed the rhythm of a heist more than once. By 4:15 a.m., it was over. No bullets. No screams. They left the employees alive but bound, warned them not to move for at least 15 minutes, and slipped back into the van. The engine hummed. Tires whispered against cold asphalt, and the van dissolved into the night. When the sun rose, New York exploded. The headlines declared it the biggest cash robbery in American history. The FBI descended on JFK like an army. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and the Lufthansa cargo building was sealed. To the public, it appeared to be a ghost job. No fingerprints, no tire tracks, no obvious trail. To the underworld, it was a different story entirely. 6 men had walked into a cargo terminal and walked out with $5.875 million in cash and jewels, an amount a day worth far more than the sticker price of that morning's headlines. It was clean, it was brutal, and it was in every way a turning point. For a few hours, the crew felt the heady high of success. But perfection in that life is a fragile myth. Men change when money is involved. The rules Jimmy set were precise. Do not spend in lavish ways, keep it low, and do not draw attention. Yet temptation and ego are hard to police. Not long after the heist, one crew member showed up at a Queens bar with a brand new pink Cadillac for his girlfriend. Another started flashing cash he could not account for. Jimmy Burke noticed. He'd told them no big purchases for a reason. Money draws heat, and heat gets people talking. Burke's response was cold and immediate. He started cleaning house. One by one, men connected to the Lufthansa job began to vanish. Tommy DeSimone, volatile and unpredictable, disappeared. Rumors said he'd been taken out for killing a made man previously, and in Burke's world, past sins could become present liabilities. Others were found shot in cars, dumped in fields, or simply never found at all. Paoli Castri, Joe Manry, Angelo Sepe, names that once walked into a diner and drank coffee now became whispers, bones, and stories. Even Martin Krugman, the bookie who'd carried the tip to Burke in the first place, faded from the record. The purge was systematic, surgical. Burke had reasons. A belief that anyone who spent or bragged would become a liability. He preferred silence to loyalty. The murders piled up in a short, brutal arc. It was no longer enough to get away with the money. It was imperative to ensure that nobody could talk. The very success of the heist made those who knew vulnerable. For every living witness was a loose thread that could unravel the whole tapestry. The mob had its own justice, and Jimmy dispensed it without judgment. It was chilling and effective. Eliminate what you fear will betray you, and in doing so, eliminate your enemies and your friends. The crew that had entered the terminal together was now a collection of graves and empty chairs. Meanwhile, the FBI was scrambling. There were whispers of mob involvement, but the agency had no smoking gun. Agents tapped phones, rated known associates, and pieced together fragments. They sifted through leads and rumors, only to hit dead ends or bodies. The investigation became a race against a force the Bureau both underestimated and feared. Jimmy Burke was clever. He didn't flaunt cash, he didn't deposit big sums in banks, and he kept his hands clean of the actual handling when possible. He orchestrated and outsourced, making prosecution difficult. They watched him from afar, built files, and hoped to stitch together enough for a conviction. The turning point came not from a perfect piece of evidence, but from the human weakness of a small-time criminal, Henry Hill. Henry had been one of the connective tissues in that world. Talkative, opportunistic, loyal to a point, but not immune to greed or drugs. By 1980, law enforcement had arrested Hill on narcotics charges. Facing a long sentence and fearing retribution, he made a decision that would change the mob's cape. He flipped. When Henry Hill began cooperating, he told a story of corporate efficiency applied to crime. He named names, recounted meetings, and traced the route of the Lufthansa operation with the kind of detail that only an insider could provide. His revelations painted a landscape of planning, power, and paranoia. Agents who had chased shadows now had a map. They learned how the heist had been planned, who had been in the van, and how the crew had been systematically eliminated afterward. Hill's cooperation was the backbone for later prosecutions and the basis for much of the public's knowledge about the heist. Even with Hill's testimony, the money remained a mystery. The government would never reclaim the majority of the stolen cash. Of the $5.875 million taken from Lufthansa that night, tiny fragments would be recovered, traces that told agents the scale of the theft but not the destination. The bulk of the loot simply evaporated into the arteries of an underground economy, rumored laundered through businesses, spent in casinos, or stashed in hidden caches. Some say Burke buried it. A dozen different men claim they know where it's hidden, and others insist it was moved offshore and cleaned through complex transfers. But none of these tales ever produced the funds. Not a single dollar's worth of the original haul was ever recovered in any meaningful amount. Jimmy Burke's life closed the way the life of a mob boss often does. Not with a confession, but with a sentence. He was convicted on charges, including murder and racketeering, not directly for the Lufthansa robbery itself. He spent the rest of his life in prison, and died in 1996, taking many secrets with him to the grave. He never admitted where the money went. He never revealed the final moves that might tie the money to an address or a safe. The heist, in that sense, remained unsolved, an open wound in the history of American crime that continues to fester with theories and speculation. But the story's darkness is less about the missing cash and more about what that cash cost. The Lufthansa heist is a brutal lesson in how ill-gotten wealth burns everything around it. Men who trusted each other enough to walk into a warehouse together couldn't trust each other afterward. Greed whispered louder than loyalty, and paranoia strangled any loyalty that might have existed. The very success of the heist created fear, and in a world where fear is managed by silence, silence required bodies. Imagine being one of those men, waking up to a world where every phone call could be a wiretap and every knock could be a hit. Imagine counting the hours until someone notices you've spent too much or been seen with too much jewelry. Imagine being the person who bought a new car and in doing so drew a crosshair nobody could remove. Would you keep silent or would you run? For those who survive longer, the choice often dissolves into a numb acceptance of paranoia. Never sleep well. Never spend openly, never speak of the night again. The Lufthansa heist became legend not because it was a perfect crime, because no crime is, but because of the way it exposed the fragile calculus of criminal life, a calculus where victory and death are often separated by a single mistake. It inspired books, documentaries, and a cultural mythology around robberies that blend meticulous planning with human error. Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas would pull from these events to dramatize the era, and Henry Hill's later public willingness to tell it all would cement the story into pop culture. Even now, decades later, pieces of the Lufthansa tapestry surface in odd ways. A rumor about marked notes showing up in a pawn shop, a whisper of a buried cache near a construction site in upstate New York, or a retired crooked cop's recollection of conversations he wasn't supposed to have. Each fragment tantalizes, then fades. Law enforcement will occasionally reopen files, follow a new lead, or dig where a late source says something important might be buried. But the main account, the largest portion of the money, remains missing. So what do you think? Did Jimmy Burke hide the money somewhere before turning on his crew? Did someone else double-cross his operation and stow the cash away under a new identity? Or was the money slowly funneled into offshore accounts and businesses, diluted into the economy until it no longer registered as criminal proceeds? Maybe the answer is all of the above. Maybe the money is scattered like seeds in a storm, some spent, some buried, some laundered beyond recognition. I tell you this not to romanticize violence or crime, but to make one point crystal clear. Power bought with betrayal is never stable. The Lufthansa heist was more than a robbery. It was a story about how ambition and fear can turn a tight crew into a graveyard. The men who walked into that terminal together counted dollars and imagined freedom, only to discover they had bought silence with their lives. If you're still with me and you want more stories that dig into the dark, complicated corners of true crime, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell. Tell me what you think in the comments. Did someone get away with everything? Or did the money die with the men who took it? Did justice happen? Even if not in the courtroom? Do you think the $6 million still sits somewhere in Queens, waiting for rain to wash over its hiding place? Because in this world, money disappears, people vanish, and stories like this refuse to die. They keep circling back into our conversations because they remind us of the fragile line between triumph and ruin, between loyalty and self-preservation. The Lufthansa heist didn't just steal money. It stole the certainty of brotherhood and left behind an emptiness that no amount of cash could ever fill.